guess the Baptist people did that too in Sunday school, had the pins.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you went, I think if you went every Sunday for a whole quarter of a year, you got a bronze pin, and then you got a silver pin, and then you got one with gold on it, and then you got bars down, just like the DAR does now. And it's funny, and of course they came in all the churches had, and that amuses me. I've seen them from all kinds of churches. I've seen Presbyterian ones.
Yeah, we had them.
You had them too. Well, I guess that some, and I don't know whether that was J. Balfour who did those. Balfour did all the sorority and fraternity things, and I wonder if maybe they didn't do the church things too. Although I never knew that. We had big, Elizabeth Gilcher and I, we had bars way down.
I bet you did.
We always from the day we were born, I guess we were trying to outdo each other.
So what was it like in church when you were sitting there on Sunday morning in the church service with your parents?
Well, we sang a lot. Of course, the Methodists have always been famous for. In fact, they were kind of called shouting Methodists. You ever hear of shouting Methodists?
Mm-hmm.
Because they were when they liked something the preacher said, it was to say Amen.
Mm-hmm.
And they got the name of being shouting Methodists. And of course, John Wesley and his brother wrote a lot of hymns, and they were very, very strong on singing. So that's always been a big
Sang
thing
a
in
lot.
Methodist church.
How long was the church service?
About an hour. No, never more
Still
than
an hour?
About an hour.
Yours too?
And our music was mainly Eva.
Oh,
Eva
yes.
Simmons
Mhm.
played the
Mhm.
organ
Mhm.
and sang. And Florence, well, I want to say Phillips, but that was her first married name. She married, Odell, Florence Odell. They sang a lot, and they always had a big choir. It was always a nice choir. And the organ was quite impressive, looked like big pipes.
Oh,
I
yes,
guess.
yes. Mm-hmm.
And Eva had a beautiful voice, and Florence did. And you see, I never could take part in community singing because it never meant much to me because I'm tone deaf. I cannot carry a tune. And I had been told about it so many times in school and laughed at so much that nobody could get me to open my mouth.
We had Florence and Stella Spencer. Stella played the organ, and they both sang. Florence sang soprano, and Stella took the seconds. And they were our principal musicians as while I was growing up.
So it was just the same as it is today, the church services, and
Yeah, I think so.
hasn't really
I liked
changed.
it very much.
Mr. Johnson was our minister, and he was a very fine man, and he married a Petersburg woman, and they were very popular, and he was there for many years.
Okay.
Yeah, he left for a while, didn't he? Or did he retire?
Yes, he was the minister that was there around 1900 when the stained glass windows went in. He was the one that got those going and got people giving money for the stained glass
So
windows.
that was 1900 when the stained glass windows went in.
I think
In
so.
the early 1900s.
Yes. And that was all due to Mr. Johnson. And
I think they were probably trying to be like the Congregationalists who had the stained glass windows, because they were in earlier too.
yeah.
The
And
Methodists never did get any stained glass windows.
then he came back again in the 1920s, I think. I would put it 1920, I don't know exactly, but along in that era, when I was in high school. And
Yeah, I seem to remember the Baptist parsonage was closed for a while, and I don't know where the when the Reynolds kids and I, Betty and Bill and I used to roller skate on the on the sidewalk, on the concrete sidewalk, one of the very few pieces of concrete, places where you could roller skate. That for quite a lot of the time, that parsonage was closed.
Well,
And
we
I don't
were
know whether
probably without a minister. I can't remember that exactly.
Well, it might not have been
I know
very long.
He came back, and I know my grandmother was very thankful that he came back. And now this was her idea of a good minister. He took good care of the property. She was glad Mr. Johnson was coming back because he took good care of the property. And he did.
Of course, the organization of the two churches is very, very different. The Methodists take the minister the conference, the bishop sends, and
Oh yeah, the
Yes.
Baptists
but
call
the
their own
Baptists
minister.
call their own. So I grew up with a whole. We lived very near the Methodist church, and we're always friendly with the Methodist minister and his wife. And minister, except for once, there was just once we had a supply young man named Don Clute, who didn't have a wife and family, but he had a Pierce Arrow automobile and wore +4s. So he was the talk of the town for about 6 months or so. But mostly the Methodist ministers had a lot of children, and they didn't stay very long, only a few years. And there were
About 3 years, I think they usually did, don't they?
well, yes, but somehow Louis Keeler, who had 4 children, he stayed there a long time. But before him, there was his first one I really remember was Mr. Jones, and he had 4 boys and a girl, and then he left in under unfortunate circumstances, not his fault. Then we had a man who stayed only a couple of years, and then there might have been another one, this Don Clute. I think he probably came after Mr. Jones, and then we had Louis Keeler, who stayed there, somehow managed to stay there for a long time until I was in high school. Well, now it doesn't seem like such a long time, but he was probably there 10 years.
He was there a long
He was there a long time.
And it was while he was there that the churches joined with Grafton.
A lot of the time he had, the Grafton churches, yes, there had been so many churches in Grafton. There'd been West Grafton Methodist, and then the Grafton Center Methodist and the East Grafton Methodist, and they couldn't find ministers for all 3 of those churches by the 1900s. I think that they went into decline.
Remember Mr. Keeler preached in both Grafton and Petersburg.
Yes, and I think part of the time he had North Petersburg.
Yeah, I think he did too.
But I don't know that he ever had all 3, but it kind of depended.
I remember he had Grafton because Aunt Agnes, who lived at our house, and was a Methodist. Of course, my grandmother was a strong Baptist, so there was a little kind of conflict there. But Aunt Agnes had born and brought up and taught school and everything in Grafton. Her father was a doctor in Grafton. She was, at heart, she lived in Grafton, but she actually, her body lived in Petersburg. And when Mr. Keeler came, and that's why I think that he was the first one that had Grafton too.
Probably first time. When they got him a car. Remember, we bought him a car.
And Agnes went around the town raising money to buy Mr. Keeler a car because he needed it.
A Model A Ford.
Because he had preach in Grafton and preach in Petersburg and preach in North Petersburg. So he had to have a car, and Aunt Agnes took upon it herself, or was prevailed upon by the congregation. I don't know how she got the job anyhow, but she went around with a paper getting money for that car. And did that disgust my grandmother? Oh!
They were sisters, I take it.
Sisters-in-law.
Oh, sisters-in-law.
Sisters-in-law.
That's a very,
sister wouldn't
very
dare do
important
that, right?
distinction.
Sisters-in-law.
Important distinction.
So Grandma stood it about as long as she could. And then she lit into Aunt Agnes something awful. And she said she'd never go around with a paper raising money for the minister. The minister needed money, he ought to raise his own money. He ought not to have Aunt Agnes raising money for his car. She thought that was the worst thing she ever heard. And poor Aunt Agnes, who was the soul of sweetness and kindness, was crushed.
Oh.
And finally my grandmother said, Victoria, go get my pocketbook. So I went and got her pocketbook, and she took it and opened it and handed Aunt Agnes a $10 bill. And Aunt
That was
Agnes,
a lot of money then, too.
yes. Aunt Agnes said, Emma, what are you giving me this money for when you feel the way you do about my getting Mr. Keeler a car? Grandma said, Agnes, I've had $10 worth of pleasure out of telling you what I think.
Wonderful. May I have the last names of the people you were just talking about?
Well, my grandmother was Emily J. Allen, and Aunt Agnes was Agnes Allen. Aunt Agnes was never married. She was born and brought up in Allen and always was.
Okay.
But my grandmother was a Maxon.
All right.
And she was a real Maxon, a typical Maxon.
Yes, she
Yes.
was. But she
Good at
was
business.
also a strong Baptist, and she was the one that was baptized on the icy rivers of the
She's the
Taj
one you're
Hall
talking
Pond.
about, your grandmother.
Yeah.
I was trying to figure out which
And
one
I
it was.
saw that hymn book.
I saw you looking at it. You
I
were
saw
at-
that hymn
yeah.
book, and that gave me a thrill to see
Oh,
that story
I was
in
so
that hymn
glad
book.
you were sitting where the hymn book was.
Yeah,
That's great.
and I sat with Jessie Hewitt and Jean Lemire.
Uh-huh.
So we all got to talk about Grandma being baptized in the
Yeah.
Josh Hall Pond. And that was at Alma's
So
service.
at
for
Allen
Alma.
service, uh-huh, uh-huh.
Alma did look beautiful. Alma did look
Oh,
beautiful.
that's good.
She had a blue casket with a blue lining. I don't know that I ever saw a blue casket before. And she had just been, like on Thursday, she'd had a permanent.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And her hair looked just beautiful, and she had on a pretty blouse, a pretty white blouse. Oh, why, that was just breathtaking. She looked so
Well,
nice.
she hadn't been ill,
Not for very long, but she had been ill for longer than I knew. They said that she had difficulty breathing. And Vera had taken her many times to the hospital, and so far as I know now, I don't know this for sure, but nobody knows what the diagnosis was. But whatever they wanted her to do, she didn't want to do. They wanted her to be on a respirator, and she refused. Well, now Alma was a trained nurse, and she
Well,
knew what
she
she
knew,
was doing
oh,
when
yes,
she
yeah,
refused to
undoubtedly,
take this
uh-huh.
treatment. And she died on Sunday afternoon. And she had been in bed for a few days, they said.
And this was Alma Church.
Yes.
And this was Sunday the 16th, wasn't it? 16th of August.
It's got that many days back.
It
I have
was.
to look at
I just put it in
Okay,
the
the
clerk's
16th.
book.
Oh, uh-huh.
She
Yeah,
was,
Sunday the 16th.
she came, she married Lawrence when they were in the service, or I think they were married when they were in the service, and soon after they
Oh, I
came
think
home
so.
anyway.
I
I think he brought her home, and they were married
yeah,
then.
must
I
have been.
think she
You know,
made-
I don't know, Lawrence must have been, was he injured in the war? I don't know if this isn't, but I guess it's all right. It might not be too great.
came to Petersburg, and she was my mother's nurse when my mother was ill. And, oh, she was so good to my mother, and she did so much. She was just wonderful. And I have always had a soft spot in my heart for Ellen. I always thought and admired and respected her a great deal. And when I went in that service, this isn't for, always summer outing to go to the snow hole. You didn't do it every summer, but quite often we Sunday school group, Henry used to take scouts up there frequently, and to take a hike to the snow hole. And I went once when I was about 10 or 11 years old with my sister and the man she later married and cousins of ours from New York. And it was the unhappiest day I ever had in my life. Everybody got in a fight. Mary and Willard got in a fight. Edith and her brother Harris got in a fight. And I couldn't keep up with them. They'd get so mad, they'd go storming off ahead. And I couldn't keep up with them. And Willard had told Mary not to pack too much lunch because he knew he'd have to carry it, and he didn't want to carry a lot of food, and for her not to pack too much. So Mary didn't pack too much lunch. But when it came to eating it, oh, is this how you brought Mary? Well, Mary hit the ceiling, I tell you. And she was so mad at Willard that she'd look up and see him and she'd start walking just as fast as she could walk. And then Edith and Harris would get mad. I can't remember what they were mad at because I was upset at Mary and Willard. But they were mad and they would go streaking off. And Willard, God bless his soul, he would look after me. He'd stay with me. And once we caught up with him, if we ever caught up with him, Mary would look up and see him coming and off she'd start again. We never could stay with him. And Harris was Edith's brother Harris was picking berries to take home to my grandmother. And he said Andy would love those berries. And there were a lot of blueberries that year, and they were big, beautiful blueberries. So Harris picked these blueberries, and he picked these blueberries. And Willard and I struggled along trying to keep up with him. Of course, Willard had the longest legs of any of them. He could have beat him, but he didn't. He was kind to me, and he stayed with me. And Mary and Edith went whirling ahead. Well, we saw the snow hole, and we saw the snow, and we did all the things you do up there. And then we came down the mountain to Bill Moon's. Now, Bill Moon was a relative of yours, I believe.
Yeah.
Bill Moon. And he was, I don't know how old he was, maybe in his 60s or so, I don't know. He had a daughter and a son, Chester and Lottie. And so we stopped there, and Bill Moon, Harris was from New York, and he was very sociable, and he spoke to Bill Moon and said that he was staying with Auntie in the village, and that my grandmother was his aunt, and so on. And Bill Moon looked at him, and he looked at those berries, and he said, "Did you come all the way up here from New York City to pick them berries?" Oh, no, Harris said, "I'm just taking them as a treat to Auntie." And we couldn't walk home. We were so worn out. We couldn't walk home. So, but Bill Moon fortunately had a telephone, and we called Frankie Welch to come and get us. So Frankie Welch came up with his car and got us and took us home.
Now, where did Bill Moon live?
Bill Moon lives, is the place
I
there?
don't think there's anything left except the big,
Which
the
place?
yellow barn, the last open
last
land,
farm.
as you go up the trail, the last open land, there was a big yellow barn, which I believe is still there.
Oh, okay.
Or it was, the
Sort
house
of
was,
back.
yes,
Uh-huh.
way below the road,
Yeah.
well,
Big farm he
Big-
had.
So that's where you were,
And he
all the
was
way,
rich.
oh, you
He
walked
was-
all the way
he
back
was-
again.
they must have come back across the
You
ridge.
came back across.
the
We
ridge
came
and
back.
down.
No, we came back, we came down.
You must have come back across the ridge first.
You
Well,
had
maybe,
to.
I
You must
don't,
have, and
I
then,
don't
and there was a
know.
road, the road went from right straight down the side of the mountain. It was,
Yeah,
not where it is now. with
Quite daring.
No fancy fill. It just went right straight down from the
Well,
top
that's
down.
probably where, we
to-
went up that old
yeah,
road.
yeah,
We walked
yeah,
up, we left
yeah.
the car where Garrison's lived now,
Mhm,
and walked
mhm,
up,
mhm.
and then across,
Yeah.
and then
And
when
then
we
back.
came back, we came down.
straight down, yeah.
Well, Frankie took us home, and Harris very proudly presented those berries to Auntie.
What did Andy say?
Auntie took them to the back door and threw them out,
Oh,
and
no.
said I wouldn't look them over to have them. They were all leaves and twigs
Oh, You picked the whole bush.
Harris was crushed. But my
Oh.
grandmother never stood on ceremony. She said what she darn pleased, and that's what she
I
said.
think Henry was a little bit like her.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And saying what he thought.
Yeah,
What he thought.
saying just what he thought. So that's what happened to the berries. They got thrown right out the back door.
Now,
And me, I was sicker than a horse. I threw up. I was so sick. And I said, I'm never going to the snow hole again. And my mother said, I will never let you go to the snow hole again. And what have you done? She turned to Mary and she said, Mary, what have you done to poor Victoria? And I was put to bed right away. I was too sick to live.
how old were you?
Well, I was.
Mary
I was
and
going
Willard
to
were
school.
married?
No, Mary and Willard weren't married, and they were
So that
married
was 1926.
26. So I wasn't 15. I was probably 11, 12, 13, something like that. I went to school to Violet Church, I know that.
Upstairs.
Upstairs, I was upstairs.
Now, you were using first names but not last names, and I lost who the people were. Can you give me first name?
Mary was my sister,
Mary was a Mary Allen.
Mary Allen at that point, and Willard was Willard Sweet, the man she later married.
Okay.
And Edith Lewis and Harris Lewis were cousins from New York. Their mother was Grandma's sister.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
Got it.
I did go back to the snow hole, though. I
Yes,
went
yeah.
back with you
Uh-huh.
and Henry
Henry.
and Paul, and we played
We
bridge at
played
the snow
bridge, we
hole.
sat down, and played bridge.
You did.
That was,
That's an interesting place to
we
play
hadn't
bridge.
been married very long.
Yeah, we went to the snow hole again, but
And,
I swore I never would. But it wasn't so bad that time.
No,
We didn't get in a fight.
No fights. No, I don't think Molly went with us, so we,
I don't think
she
so.
was big enough then, or old enough, we thought, to make the trip, so we hadn't been married very long. Well, I went once after that with Mariana Barecki, and I remember sliding down, we went over the usual across the bridge, and then we went down in the opposite direction to the north, and sliding down those rocks, and well, I was wearing slacks. I was all right, but Mariana was wearing bright yellow slacks, and flies just love the color. And she was just covered with flies and all kinds of insects.
My goodness.
That was probably August. It was warm weather. But I never seen any insects that were surrounding as they were those pants.
Well, I've read an article in a scrapbook that Anne had about a group that went from Pownell, to the snow hole on horseback. And this was about 1900 or 1890 in there.
Mhm.
Paul's mother went, and Aunt Lottie, and Aunt Lottie's Aunt Lottie.
Oh.
And they went on horseback. They took linen tablecloths, and they had a spread up there with wine and, well, I can't tell you all the things that they had, which they took to the snow hole.
These were Graves families from
Bennington.
From
Bennington Pownell.
It was a very much different affair from going
Well,
out.
I don't think that was such a terribly unusual thing to do.
Probably not.
I
never
have
had that before.
pictures of groups who would, they didn't go there, but to go to one of the Grafton Lakes. And the men would go fishing and the women would prepare, well, everything except the fish. And then theoretically at least, the men brought home the fish and then they had a fish dinner. And they would have a real, sometimes if they had a table, they might have a table, but they would often spread it on the grass, have a real picnic on the grass. And quite elaborate, as you say, quite elaborate things.
Yes.
Well, they didn't have these neat little hampers that we have now,
No.
but I'm sure they had hampers of one sort or another. And the women wearing long dresses and of course big hats and looking bright.
Yeah.
They didn't have slacks or shorts either.
No.
Wouldn't have been considered quite proper. If they'd ever heard of them, they would have been scandalized. So I think picnicking was something you did for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And going to the snow hole was one of the places, and going to the lakes was another place, and it was something that Petersburg people did frequently. And
How did you get to the lakes?
and then there was the Eagle Opera House where they had
well, that was plays.
plays.
Mhm.
I think it was the Eastern Star would have a woman come and direct plays.
That happened quite a number of times during the Depression. I think poor aspiring actors, I suppose, couldn't think anything to do with work. They would come and direct a play. You were probably in them. I was in plays.
one, yeah.
I remember there was poor band. Now I know what a trial it must have been, but it was a living. Trying to teach us to tap dance. We'd never heard of tap dance. The radio didn't tell you much about how it looked to tap dance, And movies were still silent. And so but I can remember trying to show us what tap dancing was like.
Well, I remember the one I was in, we learned the minuet. Myrtle Howard taught us the minuet, and she played it on the piano and taught us the minuet. And, but I wasn't in it. I said us, I shouldn't them, because all the real nice, graceful girls were in it. But I had a comic part. Marjorie and Helen and all those girls,
the glamour
they
girls.
had pretty little dresses, and they went, and I had the worst looking old wig on you ever saw, and carried a hen.
A what?
Hen.
Hen?
A hen.
A live one?
A live hen I carried. And Justy Williams was my mother. And
Justy being anybody's mother is pretty funny.
well,
She was a nice
she
lady.
lost something. I can't
lady.
remember now what she lost. And she demanded to me to know where it was, and I remember I had to say, "Why, Ma Snyder, you got it tied on ya." And oh dear, it was humiliating. The other little girls were so pretty and dancing around, and me and this old rig carrying this hand. I never was in another play.
Well, years before that, they had the beautiful Queen Esther.
Oh yes.
They did that at least twice. That was a sort of oratorio, but a little more than an oratorio. Probably about fifth rate. It wasn't in there with Handel and Messiah, but the story of Queen Esther, and there was all sung, and Mae Moses was the leading soprano. And,
Mr.
and Mama
Sawyer was in
that.
it.
Yes,
I don't know
yes.
what he sang.
Herod, was Herod? Have I got the right one?
I don't know.
No, not Herod.
Queen Esther?
Yeah, Queen
not
Esther, I'm in the
Esther,
wrong,
not Herod.
but there was a king, Ahasuerus. Well, my Bible
I don't
history is
remember
good
the
enough.
king. That would be her
Sometimes-
husband, right?
Yeah, well, no.
Azarias. Who was Azarias? I don't know if
I
that was
don't
a
know,
Esther.
Ahasuerus, seems to me that name is, but anyway, there was, Erskine Sawyer he would have sung the part, and I presume probably Earl and Bill and, Fred Nichols would have sung in it too, because he was the leading basso, and his
You
brother.
see, that was a thing that the churches did together.
Oh, yeah, oh, yes, oh, yes.
That was a
And the churches did it,
musical
the
entertainment.
ecumenical.
That was a musical entertainment that both
Mhm.
churches took part in.
Mhm.
And did I tell you that Edward and Becky went to lunch at the Uncle Sam Brewery in Troy, and there on the wall is the program of Queen Esther given at the Petersburgh Baptist Church.
Is that so?
And I don't mean it's a conspicuous place, but
Uh-huh,
it's at the side of, they have booths, I believe, and at the booth they sat in, here was this program. And Edward told Becky, he said, I bet my mother knew every one of those people. And the date was, I don't know, 1890 or something.
Well, you might have.
1890?
I think it was around then.
Well, you might have remembered quite a number of them,
Yeah, well, I
guess.
would have.
I have the score, my mother's score.
I have a program, I think, or I have had. I don't know if I could put my hand on it. Of course, I'm not allowed to go in the attic anymore, so I don't know what's up there.
Oh,
But
Well, now, Earl, I assume, was Earl Hewitt that you were just talking about. You talked about people having parts in it. Who was the Earl?
no,
it was William
Earl
Hewitt.
Howard. William
wait,
Earl Howard.
Earl Hewitt.
And was there a Wayne, or who else did you?
Well, Fred Nichols was, and his brother Charlie. They had good
Okay.
bass voices. But
And
they were.
May
they were
Moses, you said.
May
May
Moses.
Moses.
She was sort of. She preceded. Well, of course, she was a Methodist, but well, she was like your
Like
Eve,
Eva
like Eva
was at the
in
Baptist Church.
And I don't know who preceded Eva as the leading. Of course, Eva was brought up in Grafton.
Eva.
So Eva Simon Brown Simmons, for all of her names.
Yes.
She was brought up in Grafton, and didn't come down. I think she came down to Petersburg when after Earl and Bessie were married.
Now, this was, what year are you talking about?
You mean?
When this was
When-
given?
Oh, well, around 1900. I don't know the two. I know it was done twice, but it was around 1900. The second time must have been later because my mother would have been only 12 in 1900, and she was in at least one of the productions. And May Moses died in 1918.
1918, yeah.
No, she couldn't.
But I
she
think
couldn't have
that
died
is
in 1918.
significant as unusual in the churches that they did something like that together.
Oh, yeah, it didn't happen very often.
No.
Once in a while, a traveling charismatic minister or gospel scholar evangelist would come through, and they would have
And
reunion.
I
And
can-
quite often they didn't always agree.
Yeah.
We all remember when Mr. Davies stood up and said heresy.
Yeah.
Mr. Davies speaking.
He said it to Mr. Davies.
To Mr. Davies, yeah.
But when I grew as a child, well, until probably before I went to high school, maybe afterward, there were union services. When Mr. Johnson and Mr. Keeler were there, we had evening
Yeah, I think they got
services
along.
Sunday evenings.
Yeah, they got
One-
along.
one
They got along
church-
well together.
In one church one Sunday, and in the other church the next Sunday.
nice.
And they did that
They
for
seem to get along.
quite a long time,
Mhm.
probably, maybe, you said you thought he'd been here
Mhm.
10 years,
Mhm.
or maybe
He
even the
must
whole
have
10
been. I
years
think
they
he must
had
have been.
that. But it was unusual. Is today.
Yeah, well,
It
there
is
isn't much
today.
left of the Methodist Church today, I guess.
What is it?
There isn't much left of the Methodist Church today.
There isn't much left of the Methodist Church, no.
They were all, the families all died out and people have all gone away.
I know, I've heard Elizabeth Gilcher say that, oh, if they have 10 or 12, they have a, it's sad.
It is sad.
Well, greener pastures, I guess. Well,
But up in North Petersburg, they've got a good-sized congregation.
Yeah.
Of course, they've only got one church up there.
Mhm.
No, they've got two. They've got
well, there's that
other
funny
church.
church, excuse me, it isn't funny, that new church on Rosenberg
And
Flats.
he apparently takes quite an interest in local affairs because last night, there's all this business about adult tape store or selling.
Oh, yes.
Oh, yes, pornographic material.
And they've been driven out of Steventown, and now they want to come to Petersburg.
Do they definitely want to come?
Well, they
Yeah.
want to come because we don't have any zoning. And it was the zoning that drove them out of Steventown. Of course, it cost Steventown, it says today, something like $45,000 or even more maybe to get rid of them. But they got rid of them through the zoning, but Petersburg doesn't have any zoning. And you can only keep them out for 6 months. The town board has had a meeting, and they have voted not to give them permission to come for 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months, they can do it for another 6 months, and then that's the end. At that time, if they don't have zoning, they won't have any leg to stand on. If somebody wants to sell them a place and give them a chance. So I don't know whether the zoning thing is all coming back again or not.
Well,
But David says he's not going to do it. He can't do it. He's done it once. He can't go.
And they couldn't do, well,
He's
when
better.
they
And
tried the
Henry.
first time, Henry, I have never taken so much abuse over the telephone, and Henry took abuse every place he went when they were trying to put zoning and make, some limit on the size of lots and all that. And that was 30 years ago.
Yes.
Wow. It's been that long that
oh,
they've
yes.
been trying.
Yes.
Yeah.
When I was town clerk, and that was in the 50s, that a man named Mendenhall bought some property in East Hollow, and the Hicks property, and he had a stove museum there for a while. I don't know whatever happened to that.
A what? A
A
stove?
stove museum. He collected stoves, wood stoves, and he had his museum there. But anyway, he came to buy some kind of license. I don't remember what, and he said, "Oh, Petersburg should have zoning." He said he had just left Long Island, where they had got into the most awful struggles of this very sort. The wrong kind of businesses getting in, and business moving into a residential area, and people putting 3 houses on a little tiny lot. And he said, "Oh, Petersburg should have zoning. They should do it now before the strangers start coming in and breaking up the farms." And it wasn't very long after that an effort was made. I guess there was a kind of general effort, maybe in the county, came from the county or somewhere. Anyway, the town board appointed a committee, and Henry was on it. And the abuse that they got for nobody's going to tell me what to do with my land.
It's the same thing that just happened.
Well, if they don't get busy and do it, I think they're in danger maybe of having,
Well,
because Petersburg is very attractive to them because it doesn't have zoning.
sure, they can set up shop any place they like. How about Siggy's store? That would be a nice
Yeah.
decoration for the village, wouldn't it? Well, we hope it doesn't come to that. That's just living history.
That is living history. I know, having been from out of Petersburg and living in a place that had its battles over zoning and finally made peace with it, because we wanted to stay as small town as possible. It was a terrible battle, but it was so important, and people have no idea how important it is, because it's going. People think their rights are being taken away. Their rights are really going to be taken away if there isn't zoning, and it just has to happen. Unfortunately, it's a shame it can't be the way it was.
I don't know how complicated, whether it has to go through election or by. I don't know how it's done. How it's done. I'm sure.
Well, it seems to me it's done at the level of the town supervisors, and I don't believe that people have to vote on it. I think they can do it. I could be wrong. I don't know what New York State laws are that would happen in our town. We elected the supervisors who were standing for or against zoning, and then they could pass the law, and it would seem that that same thing could happen. But New York State's so different from Pennsylvania.
No, I don't know where how far it is. Well, of course, David has been on.
They had two meetings. They had for this. They've had two meetings. Yes, David was on the zoning thing for a long time, and he took a lot of abuse too. A lot of abuse.
And they weren't able to get it through.
No.
No, they weren't able to get it through.
But you don't know whether it was the town or whether the town could do it by itself.
It was the town. They'd had these meetings.
It was objected to, but I wonder if the supervisors could have gotten it through if they had decided to.
I don't think so. I'm
inclined to doubt it. I'm inclined to doubt it. I think it might have to be referendum.
It must be that Rhode Island blood.
New
England.
Yeah.
New England's
Nobody's going to tell me what
individuality.
to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't. I think maybe that's pretty general. Maybe a little more blunt about it, but I think that's pretty. It goes right along with not in my backyard.
Yeah.
We all want our garbage taken care of, but don't do it anywhere near me. Well, that would be too bad. Pownell was able to. Well, the one in Pownell, the porno store in Pownell, blew up.
Oh, it did?
Yeah. Yes, and they were able to keep it from. Then they were able to get rid of it by fiat some kind. But I shall never understand Vermont law.
What year did you come?
Woman and with several children, and I don't know whether there would never seem to be much evidence of a husband, and the woman got sick, and the neighbors felt sorry for the children, and for her, and they took things, Jell-O and food for the sick and the children, and one of the children went to school. And she knows the people of Petersburg, they're awful funny. They don't pay no attention to you at all. Then you get sick, and then they bring you all this food.
When you're sick, right? That's cute.
That was the only way of getting attention was to get sick. And then they bring you all food.
Yeah.
But I don't remember who those people were.
I don't either.
The people who owned that place at one time distinguished themselves by having quadruplets.
Is that so?
Well, that was the Italian family. They were real nice people. I don't know that they ever lived there year round, but there was a daughter, and that was. And I did business with him when I was town clerk, but I don't think I issued a marriage license to their daughter. But anyway, this daughter had quadruplets. That was in the paper, but not in Petersburg. Not in Petersburg.
Well, that property was rented out for a long time, I guess.
I believe it was, yes.
I know when Craig and Marty lived there, they kept hearing all this scurrying around in the kitchen, couldn't figure out what it was. So here they found out it was big water rats. I guess they
Oh, they had
Marty
taken
was
over
so
the
glad
other
they
half.
were moving out then, That was, yeah. Of course, they were right there by the
Sure,
water,
right
and then
by
there
the
was like a pond right there, too. Yeah.
The garbage man lived there for a long time. Sam, the garbage man.
Sam, yeah.
And he wasn't, no, he wasn't the one, they put in, I guess that was in Grafton. Because Sam, I don't think Sam didn't drink especially, did he?
I don't think
I
so.
don't think so.
Yeah.
In Grafton, they hung a sign on the garbage man's truck, said, "We may be drunk, but we'll take your junk."
Oh, that wasn't in Petersburgh.
That wasn't Petersburg, that was Grafton. I don't know I don't know, this was probably Lloyd Vincent, at least speculating about a sign to put on Sam, and, garbage disposal, 50 cents, keep up your payments or double your garbage bag.
So you had garbage collected here for a while.
Oh, yes, heavens, yes. Sure. Sam, unfortunately, put it all in his own backyard.
Oh.
But some of the things on Sam's garbage heap were interesting. There was a great big bellows from we could see that from our house when the leaves were off. Big bellows from the back blacksmith shop. You know, they were huge.
Mhm.
Oh, that was a fascinating thing. That was one of the things I remember when I was a child, going to the blacksmith shop. Now, you probably didn't spend as much time at blacksmith shops. I did.
No, I didn't, but I know we have pictures of the blacksmith shop going
up the hill.
Going
yeah.
up the hill.
Oh, yes, the Dyfoot flooded.
Yeah.
And washed away all around. The blacksmith shop was down by the lower bridge. It was down the Wells house, you know the Wells house, and the mill yard, or the mill yard.
The mill yard. Okay.
Yeah, Wells house is a
Right.
house it has just, Pam has just died and the children are.
Oh, that's the house that they're painting now.
Right, yeah. Well, the Dyfoot went on a rage, which it does like once every 50 or 100 years, and went right straight through the front yard of that house. And with the picture, Victoria has pictures, and I have pictures of the devastation, really. And the blacksmith shop had been across the road from that, where I guess Pammy Eggs were. She's still there.
Mhm.
The blacksmith shop had been in there, or either there or next to it, or probably next to it. And of course, it was ruined. Well, Gilbert Scriven at that time was the blacksmith, and he was not going to go through that again. So he moved the blacksmith's shop, and with horses, of course, on a skid, up to where it is now.
Where is it now?
Well, you know the overpass,
Head of
where
the lane.
Route 22, the head of the lane.
Mhm.
You know where they're doing where that awful garage business is, where the Eagle Opera House used to be. So it looks like quite a mess now.
It's being whitewashed right now.
Okay.
It's looking bad. It's been
Is
sold.
it looking at? Oh, well,
It's
that's
been
good.
sold to an oil company.
Oh, good.
And I'm hoping anyhow that they put in some pumps, some gasoline pumps.
Well, and then there's a little house just south of it, just between that and the overpass.
Yes.
Yeah, well, that was the blacksmith shop.
Oh, that was the
That was
blacksmith
the
shop.
blacksmith shop. It was the blacksmith
Ah,
shop. And Gilbert Scriven passed on to a better world, we trust. And his house went when the overpass was put in. He built the house there too,
Oh, and the shop was right
and the
beside
shop
it.
next to it. But the
The
house,
shop is still there.
the shop is still there, and it was a blacksmith shop for
But is
years
it
afterwards.
the house now?
No, it's a house.
And now it's
Yeah,
a
it
house.
was
now.
made into a house.
And well, first it was a restaurant.
Yeah.
And well, I shouldn't tell this either, but I will. I thought that a good name, because since it had been a blacksmith shop and a great many horses had been there, that it would be a nice thing to call it, to call this restaurant the Hospice. But nobody took me up on it.
I got you.
No, I forget what they
I guess
called
not.
That was before there were a
Where
lot
there were
of
hospices.
there were a lot of those.
Yeah.
It was a sort of general
Found out
word at that point.
I got the
Country
word.
kitchen, wasn't
The
it?
yes, I guess
Yes.
it was.
Country
Mhm.
kitchen.
Yep, Jesse and Mildred Lewis had a restaurant there. And I don't remember whether they sold it to somebody else or whether they sold
I
it and
think
it became
so.
a house.
It seems to me as though for a while, I don't know if they owned it, but they ran it, I think. Didn't Ray Snyder and Joyce from that?
Yes, I believe they did. I
They
believe they
did.
did.
I don't know
believe
if they
did.
owned it or not, but
And
I
I think
don't
Joyce
know.
worked there at one time.
yeah,
She said, I think that's how
Uh-huh.
she and Ray got
Oh,
together.
oh, could be.
because
They
she
were
did
young.
baking and she
Mhm,
did,
mhm, mhm.
but she doesn't do it anymore.
No, it's too bad too, because she
It is,
was
'cause she,
did beautiful work.
yeah.
Anyway, that was the blacksmith shop, and that was one of my favorite haunts. I'd just love to go in that wonderful smell. what wonderful smells. And to see Willowdale was a big, heavy, a brawny man, just like Longfellow said. And the Smith of Brawny Man was he, and the muscles of his something arms were strong as iron bands, and I'm sure that Willowdale fitted the
Yep.
picture. And and of course the horses they didn't look like horses you see on the racetrack. They had nice big feet, and mostly with long hair. And to see Willowdale wearing his leather apron with the horse's hoof and paring the hoof, and that was, of course, that was wonderful smells. There was the smell of the leather and the smell of the horse and the smell of the hoof and all. And I loved it. I thought to me it smelled real good because you know I was born on a farm.